Hi, this is John Hawkins Jr. and this is video number 1 in a series of videos I'm going to put out on addiction that I mentioned in my last video post. And I think I'd start this one with just talking about what an addiction is. There's a lot of, people use that word in pop culture. I'm addicted to this, I'm addicted to that, I'm addicted to chocolate, I'm addicted to whatever it may be, whatever TV series I'm into this. I'm addicted to Breaking Bad, whatever. That I feel like I'm just utilizing a bunch of time focused on. In psychology, there's a bunch of clinical terms for addiction, and addiction kind of falls into 4 categories, or substance or use or behavioral use of different things. Would be use, misuse, abuse, dependency. So that's been helpful in the sense of not everybody falls into the same category. So let's say somebody's going through a situational stressor like divorce or grad school, whatever it may be, and they find themselves starting to abuse a substance or a behavior. Maybe they start watching porn to mediate their stress, or they're drinking more alcohol than they normally would, and maybe they're fearful that they're an alcoholic, and they're using something compulsively, but I wouldn't put them at a dependency level. And again, there's a list of clinical terms in the psychological literature about if you fall into these categories, then you've hit chemical or substance dependency. I would say there's 3 primary areas that we would use to describe something as being an addiction. So first would be loss of control. I'm losing control of this behavior, whether it's related to a person, a substance, gambling, sex, work. Then there's obsession, preoccupation, and then there's also continued use despite negative consequences. So maybe I got a DUI, or something happened with losing custody of my kids, different things like this. I would say out of those 3, the one thing that is the biggest marker for me is obsession. Is even with today, with all the opiate addiction, the heroin addiction, being the big issues, even though cocaine and methamphetamine are making a huge comeback because of the cramp down on some of the opiate addictions. Somebody could have a physiological dependency to something like an opiate, but due to medical treatment or things like that, I would still not put that in the category of an addiction in the way that we think of it as far as treating it psychologically. The one thing that marks it for me, man, is obsession. That you involuntarily cannot stop thinking about this person, behavior, substance. That it takes up so much of my mental space. All I think about predominantly is getting my hands on this thing. I would rip this out of my head if I could. Until you've experienced an involuntary obsession, you don't really realize how involuntary it is. I mean, you would pay money to pull it out of there. And the problem is, the more you fight an obsession, the worse you will make it. That for 2 reasons. One, you're connected to what it is you're thinking about, trying to get away from, which I'm not getting away from it. I'm just thinking about getting away from it, but I'm thinking about it. The other thing is you're feeding energy to it. So the more you fight against it and try to distract yourself, it's actually pushing you deeper and deeper into your primitive brain, which will drive the obsession higher and higher. The other thing when you're looking at addiction for me is people are way too focused on their primary addiction, which typically is drugs or alcohol. So to get insurance reimbursement, things like that at treatment centers, you have to have a diagnosis of substance abuse. So I have to have, cocaine addiction, opiate addiction, alcohol dependence, whatever it may be. But what really gets looked at is the full range of somebody's compulsive behaviors, whereas research would tell you there's probably, on average, at least 3. So let's say, a common thing for me when I worked in treatment full time would be somebody would come in, let's say they had an eating disorder and they came in also addicted to cocaine. So as the cocaine addiction is subsiding, their eating disorder starts escalating. So if they just address this and then they leave treatment thinking, well, I'm sober because I haven't used cocaine in 60 days, but I'm binging and purging 6 times a day. So I'm still in full-blown active addiction. And it's astounding to me how many clinicians don't even ask about the full range of the person's compulsive behaviors, because the way the system is, it's just identify the substance use, get that addressed, move along. But it could be food. I mean, I've worked with one woman who had obesity issues, so she got the bariatric surgery, and then she became a full-on alcoholic. I had another guy I worked with who was an alcoholic and got treated for that and gained probably 65, 75 pounds in his first 2 months out of treatment. So unless you address the full range of your compulsivity, you're still going to stay in this active addiction process. And again, people throw the word around addiction, addiction, addiction. I would go more with compulsive. Like probably an area I see the word addiction thrown around loosely is when it comes to sex. You know, my husband's a sex addict, or this person's, you know, sexually addicted, or, but I would look at compulsivity. You know, just because you're using sex compulsively doesn't mean you've lost control fully or that you're obsessed all the time, but you are using it compulsively. And the difference would be this, like, let's say I have a couple come in here for an affair, and there's all these issues within themselves, between each other and their relationship that they're not really addressing. And so I'll start working with them, and I find that it's not uncommon for them to be having the best sex they had in 10 years. But they're, a lot of times they're not dealing with the real relational issues. You know, it's what I would call screwing over your problems. And it feels better to just like go have sex and then get this intense connection together, but we're not really resolving everything that created the affair in the first place. And so that's compulsivity, right? Or if instead of dealing with my relationship, I just focus on work all the time, or just bury myself in food, or, you know, go hang out and do acts of service. I work at AA, or I go to church, I do all these things. But, you know, sure, there's probably some kindness and compassion mixed in there, but they can also be a very compulsive thing, which has a lot better bow on it than smoking crack and shooting heroin. But it's the same compulsive process. And what happens is if I don't deal with my lack of ability to deal with my emotions and my anxiety, then I need bigger compulsions when these substituted pulsions don't regulate. The first client I ever worked with addiction was a guy in his 20s who had, you know, years earlier overcome a heroin addiction, but he was still smoking pot, drinking recreationally, wasn't causing really much problem in his life, but he never really learned how to recreate without substances, deal with work stress without substances, you know, just day-to-day stuff. So then his grandmother who raised him died, he went right back to shooting heroin. So everybody, I would say, you know, there's this, in the recovery community, there's a lot about like normies and addicts, which I really think is a BS distinction. That it's prominent if your issues are substances. It's a little kind of harder to hide that if I see you walking around a high or all staggering around. But everybody is on a range of compulsivity somewhere. And if you go back to what I was saying, use, misuse, abuse, dependency, not everybody's at a dependency level, but, you know, I'll get somebody who says, well, nobody in my family is an addict except me. You know, because they're the identified addict because they have a substance use issue. But then it comes to find out their brother's a workaholic, their sister's obese, you know, their other brother has a porn addiction. So, you know, I'm not necessarily the only addict because I'm the one that's the substance user. So I would, you know, if you have family members or yourself, you're looking at what is an addiction. Like I said, it's really looking at compulsivity for me. That obsession is the biggest component, but I have to identify all my compulsions if I'm going to start to get a full treatment that leads to recovery and sobriety and breaks me out of this. Now, the compulsion could also be another person, right? Let's say in something like an affair, I'm not resolving my marital issues, and so I choose to escape to this other person by having an affair, having this fantasy life, and I'm not dealing with my life and my relationship. I hope that's been helpful. Please send me any questions you have. I'm going to do a whole series on addiction. This is such an important issue. It's the #1 health issue in the United States. It affects more things financially, public health, and anything else when you really like identify all the ways it connects to everything. So I hope this has been informative, and I'm going to keep coming out with more and more things on this. Send me any questions you have. Once again, to John H. at gatewaycounseling.com, John D. Hawkins Jr. on Facebook. You can also reach me on Instagram. Any of those things, I will respond to each and every question you have, and I look forward to hearing from you. Anybody you feel could benefit from this, please share this, send it their way, and just my goal is to reach as many people as I possibly can to help others. Thank you.